wholesale. They sell firearms and ammunitions to basically what would be two retailers. They don't do retailing. The old FedEx building is on North Highway V, just near the city limits. The property is zoned M2, which is the heavy manufacturing zoning district. It is completely surrounded by the M2 zoning district. There is the closest house is a couple hundred feet away from the building. This is a street view. This is from a few years ago, but I think it's still pretty helpful. This is looking from High Point North Road. The building, you can see this is when FedEx was still there. FedEx had 2 or 3 times the number of employees that this particular used to have, and had a lot of activity. So I think this building this picture kind of highlights the difference in activity that there would be at this site. The picture also shows that there is a security fence on the property surrounding the building. That's a part of the security for the building. It has been a few years since the City Council has reviewed a conditional use permit, so I just wanted to remind you what these are. A conditional use permit, it's basically for a specified use in the zoning code that is only allowed in certain zoning districts with a special approval. So this is instead of just getting a building permit, they have to come before the board to be approved at that site. Generally, the uses could be compatible, but it's depending on the specific proposal and with any conditions that may be imposed. Such conditions, they could be they're generally to mitigate adverse impacts that the use may cause. There are criteria for approval. The Planning and Zoning Commission did review those criteria and found that when they sent this forward that it met the criteria. The criteria are things like compatibility with the surrounding uses and the impacts that the use could have. So what this is, as I said, the property is zoned M2, heavy manufacturing. There are a list of conditional uses. One of the uses is arsenals and munitions storage or manufacture. So we found that this particular business, what they do is they have a big building, and they get large shipments of firearms and ammunitions that is stored and distributed, and it's a wholesaling operation. So we found that this is the closest use in the zoning code that met this, and so that's why they're applying for a conditional use permit. Generally, I think that the code requires a conditional use permit for this use because certain users could have things that are potentially dangerous. For example, if by chance they were manufacturing black powder, manufacturing heavy weaponry or things like that, it could be a potentially some danger there. But this particular user, all what they do is it's distribution, storage, and wholesale of consumer-grade firearms and ammunition. And they do not do any manufacturing or retailing, anything of that nature. So just to summarize, a conditional use permit is required for the proposed use in the M2 district. Wholesaling and warehousing and distribution is what's proposed. No retailing or manufacturing. No explosive materials are proposed to be stored. I do have Ron, the fire chief, is here to kind of explain a little bit more about that if you need some more explanation. But in essence, we don't view this as being a dangerous storage situation. The building does have an existing fire suppression system. That's actually part of the reason that the applicant is looking at this building. The building has been vacant for sale for about 4 years now. The conditional use permit was recommended for approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission with some conditions. The conditions are in the report, but just to summarize them here, this conditional use permit is only for this applicant or any spin-off companies that if they change their name or something like that. But it would not apply to if they sold it, they shut down and the property was for sale and some other company came in and was doing the exact same use. This conditional use permit would not be allow for them. It does not allow for expansion, or if there is any expansions, it would require a review of an amendment to this conditional use permit. It's limited to storage, distribution, transfer, and wholesaling, those types of things. Retailing would require an amendment to the conditional use permit. The applicant will be required to procure licenses and such from the ATF. there's a condition that they submit a copy of those licenses for the file, just to make sure they do that. So the applicant is proposing a variety of different security measures. There is some cameras and motion sensors and those sorts of things. But there is also a security fence that's on the property, and so all those security systems, there's a condition that those be maintained, just to keep the site secure. And once again, the Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend approval of this request with a vote of 7-0, with the conditions that you see in the staff report and in the first draft of the ordinance. If you have any questions for me before we move to the public hearing?
Yeah, Eric Jensen, the CEO of Second Amendment, is, I think, online with Zoom, and we certainly want to make him available for questions and for him to say a few words during the public hearing. But as Tom said, is there any questions for him right now? David?
Two quick things. One was just if more raw materials or different munitions begin to be stored there, would that bring it back to planning and zoning, or basically as long as they continue to operate as a business with whatever they have, we wouldn't come back? I just want to clarify the understanding of what planning and zoning was recommending there.
The idea is that the approval is for what they're proposing today.
Specifically what they're proposing. If anything deviates in the future from what they're proposing, they would come back to planning and zoning?
Exactly what we mean by anything deviating, that's kind of a fine line.
Like different products that are maybe more like black powder, some of the things they said they aren't selling, but maybe if they change to?
Black powder, certainly.
Okay.
But moving to a type of ammunition that maybe we haven't thought of today or something like that, probably, or laser scopes, accessories, those sorts of things, would probably not so much, but.
Okay. Other quick question, and this might be more for the CEO when he speaks. I'm just curious, it sounds like they're originally in North Dakota and looked at Rolla. Just happy to see that folks are seeing us from a distance, but just a little curious how he found it and how Rolla became a fit for him, but that might be a question for him.
Well, if he's online, I think he probably could answer that just as well as me.
We'll
could you repeat the question again? I didn't quite hear it. It was when you talk fast, it kind of muffles it from a distance here.
Eric, why don't you just give us a chance? We'll circle back after the public hearing, so then you can answer all the questions at once.
Okay, whatever you guys want to do it, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Ann, your question, but please bring your mic
Just had
down.
something
Ann?
for clarification.
Yep, bring your mic down.
For clarification, in the discussion paragraph, it referred to the classifying the proposed uses, and manufacturing was in there, although they were not anticipating manufacturing. Would this allow them eventually to manufacture?
No.
With permission or?
No, that is one of the conditions of approval, is that basically it's just for wholesale distribution, storage, those types of things, no manufacturing.
Okay.
Terry?
Will they bring their own employees to work there?
That is going to be a good question for him to answer. The short answer is most people will be hired in this area. There will be a few people that have to transfer from there. Yes.
Have the did any of the neighboring businesses were they notified before the conditional use permit was sort of put before planning and zoning, or is it sort of like they got notified in the sort of like about the public hearing tonight?
The public notice was made before the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. There was a sign placed on the property, ad in the newspaper. We did send letters to the surrounding property owners. We did receive a email from Brewer Science stating that they didn't have any opposition to this.
Okay.
Anyone
you.
else? This side?
My question was answered, but as long as you guarantee us there's no big boom.
We can have Ron come up and talk about that a little bit, but yeah.
Council persons online, any questions? If you would, just please raise your hand. Okay, we'll circle back. I'd like to take this opportunity to officially open the public hearing. Is there anyone that owns property within 185 feet of this property that would like to speak for the proposed granting of conditional use permit? Is there anyone that owns property within 185 feet that would like to speak against the proposed granting of this conditional use permit? Is there anyone that owns property outside of the 185 feet that would like to speak for the proposed granting of this conditional use permit? And finally, oh, I'm sorry, Lister?
Maria's raising her hand, I think, too.
Okay. Is there anyone that owns property outside of the 185 feet that would like to speak against the proposed granting of the conditional use permit? If not, let me turn, while we're still under the public hearing. Yeah, I know. Oh, are you sure it's a question this time?
I don't know.
Lister?
I was just handing my hand up because I knew Maria was waving her hand and I didn't know if anyone saw her. That's the only reason I raised my hand this time. So.
Okay. All right, so while we're still within the public hearing, Eric, would you like to say a few words? And then you want to tackle the two questions that have at least come up so far?
I guess there was one person I was planning on inviting to the meeting, but I didn't get around to it. There's one of our dealers in Rolla, Missouri, buys quite frequently from us. Some of you may know him, David Long, Pawn Center. So he would certainly stand to have a significant business benefit by our, warehouse premise in your city. So he would basically be able to pick stuff up. He would be the only dealer locally that would be allowed to, pick stuff up at the same day, basically, So, but yeah, we're not planning on any retail at all. In fact, that's actually a very strong, thing in the firearms industry. The company that wholesales, the manufacturers want you doing that and that only. So there would be no change of, plans in that regard. This building is specifically for wholesale distribution of, small arms and completed ammunition. There's no reloading components we carry right now, and there's no plans to manufacture our own ammunition or store black powder or anything of that nature. So as far as the big boom, joke, there's no, little to no concern about that. The fire chief, I believe, is here. But the weapons and everything are just standard, civilian firearms, handguns for self-defense, as well as, rifles and shotguns. And all the, shipments come in bulk, to us, and then we just ship them out in smaller increments to FFL retailers across the country. So, and there were a couple questions I recall. Tom was correct. Most of the employees would be hired locally. We do have some management level employees that would likely come from North Dakota just to, set things up and to train. I guess the other questions were kind of murky. I didn't quite hear. So I don't know if you want to just open back up the questions, but I think that pretty much covers it. We're looking forward to the opportunity. And I believe someone mentioned, they were happy we found Rolla. The building is fantastic, for us. It's perfect size, perfect, outfitted perfectly. And from what I can tell, the owners of the building, have had it for a while, and they're looking to, they want to sell it, and we want to buy it. So hopefully this, conditional use permit goes through and doesn't derail that. And we are going to get, obviously, once we're approved for this conditional use permit, we'll apply for a federal firearms license. And the type of FFL is going to be an 08, which 08 is importer and reseller of firearms other than destructive devices. So, our FFL license is actually somewhat restrictive as well on what we can and can't do as a business. So, the FFL type for making ammunition, for example, is a type 06. So, with our FFL, we can't even make ammunition. And legally, we're not going to either way, but, and then also with manufacturing, you need a type 07 FFL. So you can't build guns unless you have a type 07, and we're not applying for that FFL. It'd be the same FFL as we get federal firearms license as we have in North Dakota, which is, reseller and importer of firearms and accessories, so.
Eric, I think Councilperson Schott wasn't necessarily relevant to the conditional use permit, but we always try when some business comes to town we'd like to try and learn as to why that is. So I think his question was, how did you find us and why did you pick us?
Okay, that was the comment I was referring to about the city that I thought heard half of. Okay, so the reason I found you is, I mean, don't tell the people that have a signed contract the building on, but because they might try to cancel it and charge more money. But the price of the building is absolutely fantastic for for what it is. I mean, I spent 10 to 12 hours plus searching online specifically for an out-of-state warehouse because there was nothing in Grand Forks, North Dakota that was going to be suited for us in the size that we needed. There was just one overpriced potato warehouse with no lights, no heat, for more money than this. So that was the one reason. The building size was perfect. The building price was attractive and fair. And then, secondly, we decided internally several years prior to even looking for this new warehouse, was that we wanted a centrally located warehouse, so that way all of our ground shipments via FedEx Ground is, basically 2 to 3 business days in transit time, as opposed to North Dakota, we're shipping out, it's, 4, even 5 days sometimes to the southern tip of Florida. So there's a business strategy, along that, and it'll be cheaper shipping as well, being centrally located. So Kansas City, is one, obviously, but, kind of where we were looking around. And that's how, you guys came up as a city, pretty close, roughly, to that, so.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Eric within the contents of the conditional use permit?
I think there were some chat questions.
Marie?
Yeah, so one of my constituents, Ray Swikart, asked that we would read, he wasn't able to attend tonight, but he asked that we would read his statement in favor of passing the conditional use permit. He said for the following reasons. Number one, it appears that approximately 30 new jobs will be created without creating any cannibalization of existing business. Number two, it will be housed in an existing long-term empty building. And number three, a tax revenue source. I ask that you approve CUP for this business. So just wanted to share his thoughts for the record.
Thank you.
Okay, Lori, there are on the screen 9 comments. I don't know that we need to, okay, I was going to say if you just want to.
This one from Mr.
Can you see those?
Okay.
Okay, I think that was just one question for all that.
All right, do you have a similar distribution? Okay, Eric, do you have a similar distribution in a town close to our size, and how long have you been in that community?
Okay, so that's a good question. So we have our company is currently operating, as Second Amendment wholesale in North Dakota, which is a town of roughly 50,000 people, and actually has a large college inside of it as well, which is similar to Rolla, Missouri. So the area is a little bit smaller in Rolla, Missouri, but it seems like a larger percentage of the population are looking for work in like a warehouse type setting. So that was kind of what offset the smaller population compared to where we're at right now in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And as far as duration goes, the business was formed roughly 5 years ago, but main operations began 3 years ago. So we've been going strong for 3 years and growing, in fact, exponentially recently. So even though it's 20 to 30 jobs roughly at first, I mean, there's it could certainly be double that in a couple of years from now. The building is large enough, obviously, like someone said earlier, FedEx had a little bit more employees, and we certainly could build up to having a lot more jobs than just 30. So that was mainly just to clarify that 30 figure is basically what I would estimate, for the first 6 to 12 months. But if we continue the current growth and the way, our demand for our products that we distribute has been increasing, month over month for the past year, basically. I mean, ever since, early last year, we've been basically forced to hire as many people as we can, and it's really tough to keep up with the growing demand. So we have good experience, and we're professionals, and we know what we're doing, and we're safe in all the boxes, are just, the guns are kept in the boxes and shipped out and just verified with serial numbers and shipped out. So there's no, there's nothing to be, nothing to be worried about. We know what we're doing, and we have good experience.
Thank you. Is there any other questions for Carolyn?
One question, do you plan to keep both businesses open, Eric, or are you going to take everything to Rolla?
That is a good question. So that actually has been, I hired a manager to basically replace the manager that is going to come to Rolla to open that warehouse. So I am planning on keeping both open. There are some other businesses I own that are related, that are based in North Dakota, that will essentially sort of take over most of that building, if you will. It'll still remain a Second Amendment wholesale FFL warehouse, but we are planning on transitioning into using that warehouse for a storage facility for my retail company that actually manufactures guns in North Dakota. So that company is getting started in, they're basically already started, but they're going to start building their own guns here in bulk in about 2-3 months. But that's all in North Dakota based, and we're not going to ship the guns, from my retail company in North Dakota down to the Rolla, Missouri warehouse when we already have a warehouse up in North Dakota. So we are planning on continuing that warehouse. It'll be basically a secondary warehouse, and probably maybe staffed down a bit as we get rolling in Rolla, Missouri. But I have no idea how long it's going to take us, to staff and train. So we weren't planning on closing that at all, but maybe reducing it over time.
Could I clarify one thing? We're going to welcome you, but the town is Rolla.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had it right a long time ago, but then I got busy for a week or two and I forgot how to say it. Rolla. Okay. Rolla. Hold on 1 second.
Got his assistant.
Are there any questions for Tom? Are there any questions for Eric? If not, this closes the public hearing.
Sorry for butchering the town name. Hopefully y'all don't hold that against me.
Okay, so something some of us are curious. How cold is it in Grand Forks, North Dakota right now?
Too cold. So it's my general manager that's coming to open the Rolla, Missouri warehouse said I heard the garage door was froze shut, so he tried to bump it with the forklift. Apparently that didn't go too well.
Cold.
So it's so cold the garage doors get froze to the ground. So I did look at the average temperature in January in Rolla. I believe it was around 40 degrees, so it's above freezing. So that's amazing.
Okay, there's no more questions. Can we have the first reading?
An ordinance to authorize the issuance of a conditional use permit to the property known as 4060 High Point North for the use of arsenals and munitions storage in the M2 Heavy Manufacturing District.
Thank you. Eric, welcome to Rolla. Moving on to the next section, we have a couple of special presentations. First is a life-saving award. Chief, would you introduce everyone?
Good evening. Before we get started, I would like to introduce everybody to Jeremy Ward. Jeremy is one of our new officers, a recent graduate of the Law Enforcement Training Institute in Columbia, Missouri. Didn't take long for Jeremy to jump right in the fray here. While still on field training, on January 28th, he was dispatched to a house for a medical emergency. On the way to the house, he learned that it was an overdose. When he got there, he was immediately directed to the back bedroom. When he went back there, he saw the victim of this overdose. He and his field training officer administered 3 different doses of Narcan on this person, and Jeremy immediately started CPR. Well, emergency medical personnel arrived and continued working with the person, but the whole time they were there, Jeremy was doing CPR. He wouldn't stop. I think that it was even to the point where they said the person was deceased, and he wouldn't stop. He continued to do CPR for over 10 minutes. I don't know if anybody knows what it's like to do CPR, but after 2 or 3 minutes, you're exhausted. In fact, we asked him how he could do CPR for so long, and he said that his father used to teach CPR when he was growing up, and he would attend his classes, and his dad would always teach his students, you're going to learn to do this, learn to do it for at least 10 minutes. Well, apparently he took it to heart. I was called at home and advised that we had an overdose death with this call. Well, because of Officer Ward's actions and the work of the emergency medical personnel, when the victim got to the hospital, they were able to reestablish a pulse, and because of his actions, it literally saved this woman's life. So far we're presenting him with a life-saving award.
Jeremy, thank you. You know, the word hero is a big term, but you're a hero.
Thank you.
Rodney, you got a tough act to follow.
Did you miss one?
No, you found it. Okay. Quarterly presentation.
Yes, sir. All right, let me. F5. Okay. Thank you again for having me tonight. This is our normal process. I do a quarterly report, obviously every quarter. So this is the end of our first quarter of our 2021 fiscal year. This is just a summary of some of the things we got going. And then I want to ask, we've had a lot of questions starting yesterday about possibility of blackouts in town, so I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit. So before I start this, I do want to say that as of today, we have opened up our business office for regular traffic again. So the traffic can, our customers can come now into the office again. We do ask, though, that if they are in the office, they maintain normal standard protocols, social distancing, masks, etc., or continue to use our virtual services, including online bill pay. There's all kinds of ways to pay your bill that you don't necessarily need to go to your office. You can call us and help set up your accounts over email. Even for disconnection, you just call our office to take care of a lot of business without even coming into the office. So again, the weather's been bad today, but it'll be getting nicer. But again, we have a lot of services available. Customers have been using it, and we encourage them to continue to do that. So let's get started. Again, kind of standard for my report, kind of standard. We're going to do financials, the pending projects, and a few miscellaneous things. So I was unable to provide this financial information in the quarterly report you had. It went out before we were able to compile this. But quickly going through a summary of our financial situation. Our revenues are down a little bit compared to the same quarter last year by $350,000. Our expenses are also down, which is good. But our operating income is down total between the two, about almost $800,000. The next line you'll see is quite a big number. Other income and expenses is up $8.4 million. This is the gain on our Ameren sale. After we put in our books and did our financials, this is the gain on a sale of an asset, which shows our net income for this quarter being $7.6 million. So it's skewed by that big number. If not for that, it would looks quite so rosy. So, but that is the financials as of the end of the quarter. Talk about just a few of the electric projects we got going on. I won't touch on everything that's in the report. We're continuing to work on Kings Highway. A couple of major things. We still have a couple small services. I think most of the commercial buildings are on the new lines now, but we have to. There's a Linwood subdivision, which is to the south of the railroad tracks. It's fed off that lines. We need to come in and convert that to our new 12 kV system so we can eliminate that connection to these lines. Once we get that done and a few other things, our poles are ready to come off. The problem we have is Fidelity is still on them and still active on them. So until they get off our poles, there's not much we can do. So they may be a little bit of a holdup. So we had a few things going on there. Next big project coming up will be the University Drive relocation project. and we're making preparations for that. I think I've mentioned it. Our plan at this time for the poles along Spring Avenue and 13th Street, so kind of visualize coming off the off-ramp, it's going to dive from the off-ramp or the 185, cut through that neighborhood over toward where Hardee's and Huddle House are. When all the trees are gone and the road's in, you're still going to see a lot of overhead lines through there. And the reason for that is while the university and this area is being planned for redevelopment, we don't want to move lines today and then find out a year from now a big building is going to be parked where the new lines went. So what we want to see is after this is all, the road's in, we start seeing what the university has planned, what the businesses might have planned in the area. Then we'll start talking about what are we going to do with power lines, how are we going to move them so that we don't put them in the way of something now. And so I just we've told the university this, we've told everyone this as we talked, we've told the TDD board this. We just want to make sure everyone's very clear. It's going to be quite the visual when you come off the 185 with these power lines still there and the trees aren't there anymore. So we're just going to make some minor adjustments on those poles to start with our intention being to do a major relocation once we start seeing development happen and making sure we do things and don't just spend a lot of money today, only have to redo it in just a few years. And then the other thing what I wanted to mention is we did have a mutual aid event in early January. Hannibal had a ice storm that hit them pretty hard. We sent 6 of our staff members up, and they were up there for several days helping out the Hannibal Board of Public Works. A couple water things. We still continue to work in the Olive Street, Highway 72 area. We finished the main project through there, but the city still, Public Works still has some plans to do some side roads around there, so we're still working in that area doing water main replacements. The other area our service line crew is working at is on Scottsville Drive, and they're doing service line replacements there, but they've completed Victoria Drive, Honeysuckle Lane, and like I said, they're currently working in the Scottsville Drive area. Continue to add fiber. I don't think that's me. Continue to add some fiber into our system, and then talk about a little bit. Dennis Roberts, our business finance manager, retired early November. We wish him the best in all his future endeavors. We also had an operations foreman retire February 1st, so we've lost some key personnel. Good news is we've hired an engineer 1 in October. We've got a new finance manager on board late December. Our business manager started January 15th, and we had a systems technician on January 25th. So we've lost some people, but I think we've got some really good people back on board with us. So so we've refilled those slots, and everything's looking pretty good. There's also, we did a few presentations. Every year we try to go to the high school and do an experts in the classroom. That's where mainly our line crews, our outside field staff go to the high school, set up a big equipment and truck display outside, give some of the students that might be an opportunity that if they're interested in that type of work, line work, water crew, tree trimming, all the things that we do in the field, we invite them to come out and see what we do. And like I said, put up a big equipment display so they can see what we're doing. And again, it's a great career. All those careers are great careers. And again, but it takes the right person to want to do some of those jobs. So we give a lot of them an opportunity to see that. And then also on December 7th, I went over to the high school myself and did an introduction to RMU. So basically government classes. I had 3 government classes, and I spoke to those classes about not just RMU and what we do, but how we fit into the city government. And so we have the city of Rolla proper, Public Works, and all the departments that the city's managing. Then we have all the boards and commissions of the city. And so we kind of talk about how we fit in, who we report to, who we're responsible to, all those types of things. So, and again, did that on December 2nd. So with that, happy to answer any questions on those things.
Rodney, is there any reason to believe that the Fidelity relocation lines will delay our project?
That, I think you'd have to, I'd probably defer that to Public Works. I know what I heard this morning or today was that they had intentions of doing some boring and start doing some of that work, but I do not know what their schedule
Yeah,
is.
I understand there's, weather considerations, but let me take another stab at it. I know there's pole connection agreements or things like that, so if there are delays, can they be legally nudged?
Yeah, to some extent, I'm sure they can, but like I said, they're really working at the behest of the city and the TDD group, not us. And so, but it's a very important thing and something we've been trying to get out. Actually, CenturyLink, we were concerned that CenturyLink wouldn't be as far along as they are, and they've done quite a bit of work to get their stuff moving along. So,
okay.
But we are in conversation with Public Works about fidelity and that they're probably, we think we're going to be done before they're done, and so we want to get our stuff out of there.
Okay. I don't want to put Darren on the spot, so we'll talk about that tomorrow. Any other questions by council folks? I think Rodney's going to circle back on the power outages. Is that?
No, just a quick one. Kings Highway, that one gets moved off at some point. Is there a time frame for that? I mean, obviously there's a lot going on Kings Highway, but eventually the electric lines get moved.
Well, the new power lines are already installed.
Okay.
And both on the back side, on the north side, along the golf course, and the south side. And like I said, all those commercial businesses through there are now being powered from the back side.
Didn't realize.
So our power line is really mainly serving a couple small, I think the ATM, that's by Lucky House. A couple minor services are still on it. And the Linwood subdivision to the south of the railroad tracks. Actually, we jump across the railroad tracks and feed that whole subdivision from that power line. That's the next big thing we got to do is convert that entire system from 4,000 volts to 12,000 volts. It's going to take a day or two. Obviously, this is not a good week to do that. Maybe toward the end of the week we might try it. That's the biggest thing we've got, obstacle that we have left.
Okay. Most everything's moved back already.
Right. It's already being fed off those new lines that we put in.
Okay. You want to talk about service during this weather?
So yesterday, I heard a lot of radio reports about potential blackouts, brownouts, Springfield, Oklahoma, a lot of places. We've had a lot of calls today, had a few phone calls. Excuse me, yesterday as well. We had an email from Councilperson Schneider relaying some of those same concerns from some of her constituents that she's talked to. So got that information. I wanted to kind of address what's going on in Rolla and a little bit of the market. So without going, if there's only one thing I say that you remember is based on the information today, right now at this very moment, we don't anticipate any brownouts or blackouts in Rolla. We know there's reports of SPP has had more. They went to level 3 again this morning. I'll talk about a little bit about that. We're having some brownouts and blackouts, controlled outages still in their territory. The co-op system has come out this morning saying we want customers to conserve. We may have to trim load. If we do have to, we may do the same type of thing. We have not got that indication from our regional transmission providers. So, so that's it. That's the main thing. So, with that, I want to kind of explain a little bit of somehow we switched over. Oh, we were working on something. So locally, it's important to know we have control. Our system is working like it's designed, and we're in good shape here in Rolla. And that's extremely important. So we've only had a few minor electrical outages over the weekend, nothing out of the ordinary for our current conditions. Everything's been working really good. We did hit a peak demand on Monday, almost got there again today, this morning, but well short of our equipment capability. So locally, we're doing very well with our grid that we control. And again, it's important everyone understands that that's the really major component that we control is what happens in town, and that's what we're doing. And again, rolling blackouts are not planned or forecasted in the city of Rolla based on the current available generation and based on the information we have today. If we have a couple power plants drop offline that's serving some of our load, that could change, and we could move into a different situation. But right now, today, The MISO grid is operating, it's at max generation, but it's meeting the demands of the load. And, excuse me, and we want to make sure, though, that the essential workers in town, they're working, excuse me, it's somewhere I get very emotional. They're working so hard in the worst conditions possible. Unbelievable. So, big shout out to them. So, and that's, excuse me, that's fire, police, EMTs, ambulance, public works, all the utilities, county, sheriff, highway patrol, just worst conditions possible. So, what about the news reports we're hearing? You know, and these are some either headlines or excerpts from some articles. SPP implements rolling blackouts, high demand. Day-ahead real-time tops $3,000 per megawatt hour. What that means is that's about 100 times the normal price in the spot market and real-time day-ahead markets. That's the power markets we're seeing. Again, not necessarily in MISO, but in that SPP market. I'll explain that in a little bit. Southwest Power Pool began calling utilities implement rolling blackouts and avoid uncontrolled blackouts due to extreme winter. Rolling blackouts order then rescinded. That happened yesterday. Later in the day, included areas of Oklahoma. They rescinded that this morning. They started again. They backed off again about by 9, 10 o'clock. But again, this is very volatile, very situational, very fluid, and very subject to change at all the time, depending on how much generation they have and what the load is. And that's kind of what this SPP Chief Operating Officer said. But things change. You know, we could be in this situation again, in and out of these curtailments between now and Thursday. And that's kind of what we're going to say. The same thing too, is we're looking at Thursday. Hopefully, we're getting out of this. We become more moderate temperatures, more available units are brought online to start backing up some of this load. So the key here is what I've highlighted, SPP, the Southwest Power Pool. That is a regional transmission operator based to the west of us. It covers a little bit of western Missouri, but mainly from parts of Texas all the way north to North Dakota and all points in between. Hits parts of about 14 states. That this is the independent system operator operating that transmission grid and those resources out there. It is not the grid that Rolla is connected into. So this is kind of just a really rough map of where we're at, and I don't know if the highlighter works, but we're SPP again covers a little bit of this Missouri territory. Associated is scattered all over here, and MISO mainly hitting the western part, some of the northern part of Missouri. We're kind of split between 3 independent groups. We got SPP on one side, MISO on the other, and Associated all over the middle of the state. Makes it a little more complicated to operate our power pool in all the cities because we've got cities in our group in all those areas. So each one of these is a transmission operator and power and resources operator for their territories. We are in the MISO territory, and MISO has not issued any type of curtailment activity for any cities and investor-owned utilities, any utilities associated and hooked into that grid. And we're hooked into Ameren's grid. That's what we're hooked into. So we're not directly impacted by these outages, but we are impacted by the high prices. And so that's something to be aware of, is this if we had a tornado here, we had a tornado not that long ago, and gasoline prices spiked. Same type of thing you're seeing. It's supply and demand is what's going on and for the energy market, and we're seeing some pretty ridiculously high prices. So just real quickly, I've kind of said this, we're divided between 2 independent system operators and Associated. Our MOPEP cities are scattered all over those 3 territories, which complicates our power supply and delivery somewhat, but something that we deal with every day. And the recent events are an SPP issue. Again, I want to emphasize it's SPP. They've had limited wind power. They're very heavy on wind, but when it got this cold, the wind turbines just won't go. And then they've had to compound it. The next fuel supply they would go to would be natural gas. There's restrictions on the natural gas. What's happening is the supply is there. They can't. The wellheads are froze up, and they can't get it out of the ground into the supply chain. So that's complicating things for them. And it's simple. When the demand for power approaches that supply capacity, blackouts are possible. The question is, do you want to do them planned or unplanned? And so what they're doing is they'd rather try and get their consumers to conserve. That's the best option. If they can't do that, then they might have to do these rolling blackouts to reduce load in areas to try and keep underneath that, underneath the supply. Because if you get above the supply, the systems become unstable, and now instead of just hundreds or thousands of people out of power, everyone's out of power. And I think you're seeing that possibly in the Texas markets. So on Monday they were able to shed load, avoid rolling blackouts. Now we're starting to see more power plants come on, but again, the temperatures are having a big play in what's going on. So, we're still concerned about what's going on in the markets. We're still in a very volatile, very fragile environment. So, should we be concerned in Rolla? Yes, we should still be concerned in Rolla, but we should control what we can control. So the important thing is we should try and control what we can do here locally and within our power pool. So conserve where we can safely do it. So there's a few things to do, but we want to protect the health and safety of our citizens. If you're elderly or you have health conditions, certainly we're not advocating you do things that would put you in a risky behavior. We don't want to limit property damage. If you lower thermostats down, you can cause other problems, pipes freezing, other damage. We're not really interested in doing that. We just want people to take some just common sense approach to trying to limit their use of energy. This eases pressure on our regional transmission system, which makes just extends the possibility of us not getting into these bad situations. And I'll have a few more tips on the next slide. MOPEP. Talk a little bit about MOPEP. That is our power supply resource. That is our group of 35 cities that we work together to buy our power, get it into our towns over the transmission grid. We use the staff of Missouri Public Utility Alliance in Columbia to help us do this. They're professional staff. They've got a 24-hour scheduling desk, energy scheduling. They're having probably not just a daily conversation. They're probably having many conversations a day with independent system operators. What's going on? What do we need to be concerned about? What are they looking at? They're doing 24/7 monitoring of not only our cities, but what's going on in the markets, what energy is costing, all those types of things. They aggregate our bills. They're working for us to minimize these increases. They're telling us, hey, if you guys can do this, that's going to help you out. They work for us. That's kind of the bottom line. They work for us. We don't work for them. They work for us. They are our resource. And we are the ones, as sitting board members, that decide what they are going to do or not going to do. But they are working for us in this situation. And well, in all situations, but they work for us. And so it's key to remember we are MOPEP. We are that group. They're just our professional staff to help us manage our resources. And then we got the Regional Independent Service Operators. That's the SPP and MISO. That is out of our control. They are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They have the final say on dispatching. And their primary job is to ensure reliability of the overall transmission system, to make sure it doesn't fail. And so, unfortunately, that means they have to make hard choices sometimes, which they've had to make a few. But again, in Rolla, we're looking pretty good right now based on our resources. If there's anything else I want to say about that. I think we've talked about that. So some things we can do here locally overnight and again through Thursday. But these are things, if you went back to the 1970s energy crisis, and I think I've said this at one of these meetings in the past, a lot of the things I'm going to say tonight were things that you could have done 30, 40 years ago to conserve energy. These are all free, but wear layers of clothing, use extra blankets. I think I've often said, before you reach for the thermostat, reach for a sweater, reach for a blanket. You know, try and bundle up a little bit if you're dropping your thermostat a little bit. Set the thermostat. The recommended setting, believe it or not, is still 68 degrees. Most people say, I can't do that. Some people can, some people can't. but that's the recommended setting coming from the federal government. Set it as low as possible. But again, customers who are elderly, have medical conditions, complicated by the cold, should not do this. I mean, they need to make sure they stay safe. And we're not asking anyone to do anything that's not safe for them. Lock your doors and windows. That sometimes tightens up, better seal. If you got drafty windows, try and do some things, closing window shades, those types of things. Don't make sure your vents are open and clear. Close your fireplace damper if you have one. Best fireplace is probably not having a fireplace, because they're notorious for letting more heat out than in. Roll up towels, use at the bottom of leaky doors. You don't have to go buy fancy stuff. You can just do some basic common sense things. Turn off non-essential lights. Postpone, rather than doing the laundry and running a dryer in the next 2 or 3 days, postpone that to the weekend when it's going to be a little bit nicer. Turn off any unused appliances, monitors, chargers. Sometimes they call these the phantom loads, but those are some basic things. As I said in the email to John and Rachel, it's too late to go decide you want to go put in a new heating and cooling system for this round. It's probably too late to go buy a bunch of insulation or get an insulation contractor. It's too late to do some of those things that cost money and take a lot of time to do. These are some simple things you can be doing, though. And the most important one is monitor that thermostat. I'm constantly amazed at how many people will have their thermostat set up higher than what I would say it needs to be. But again, you wouldn't want to live in my house, because it's pretty cold in my house most of the time. But that's because I'm not only practicing some of these conservation tips, you save money. I mean, that's the reality. You keep the thermostat lower. We're trying to overcome a tremendous temperature differential between what's outside and what you want to keep your house at. And the more you can make that differential smaller, the less energy you're going to use. It's just that basic. And it's just a tip that you're still going to have high bills, but you can try and minimize the damage. So with that's really all I had. But again, I want to give you a quick update. It's a very complicated issue. If any of you would like to sit down, or if anybody's watching would like to sit down, learn a little bit more about it. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I'm happy to share information, and so our customers understand, the city council understands. Certainly, I want my board and our staff to understand.
Rodney, can you take a presentation off so we can see the online council people?
Yes.
Let me go to them first. Any of you folks have a question for Rodney? Okay. How about council members in attendance here? David?
Just a quick one. Thank you for all your efforts during this time. Like you said, thank you to all emergency and essential workers. And, I think one thing that from you coming and giving these reports, and also just awareness of how RMU works, we can all have a great level of confidence in within our own system. Obviously, there's outside forces that we can't control, but I think the citizens of Rolla should really be thankful for all the hard work that you and your staff do. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
The one quick question I had, and not to get too in the weeds, but just a general question, if it can be kind of a quick answer, is I know there are some generators in town that RMU operates. Are those mostly for kind of emergency to power emergency buildings, or are they something that you kick in otherwise, just to have an idea?
So generally they're used for three things. One is if we've got power supply reserved and we can't, and for some reason it gets cut, and we can't, the actual source is cut down, or it becomes very expensive if it's a market price or something, and we can operate less expensively with our diesels. That's one reason why we started up. If we've contracted for power but we can't get it here for some reason, Ameren transmission or some other point along the way in the transmission grid is preventing it from getting to Rolla, that's another reason why we'd use those. And then if we have a major outage where we lose a transmission grid, we can start some of those units up and generate some of the power that we could use in the community. We cannot generate all that would be required. That's something we want to make sure. These weren't designed to supply the whole town. They're designed to supply part of the town and part of our needs. Circling back, the cold weather has played havoc on everything. Not just getting power plants up and running, equipment. I was talking with Darren before this. They're having a hard time with their trucks, their equipment gelling up, running. We've been called on to operate several of our diesels. As of yesterday, we had 2 that we got running out of our 17. The cold weather has been such a tremendous impact to those units, and much more than we would have thought. But again, fuel gelling, batteries not being able to crank hard enough. Once we get them cranking, they just won't fire. Again, injector problems. It's just a myriad of problems. So we've been able to get a couple of those units running. Today we're able to get a couple more on. So we're doing what we can. But even communities that have been able to get them up and running, keeping them running is another thing. And so we've had other of our communities blowing fuel hoses, all kinds of stuff on similar type units. So we're thankful we got some up and running, but that's kind of the real basics of it. So I think right now, at the moment, I don't think we're running anything at the moment, but we're called on possibly to run again in the morning.
Any questions? Any other questions for Rodney?
And
If not, thank you, Rodney, and thank to those employees that are
they're
cold there,
fantastic.
making sure we're all nice and warm.
and I tried to keep it brief, but sorry.
Moving on to old business, we have 2 items. The first is an ordinance to amend the city personnel rules. John?
Yeah, we do an update of our personnel rules every 6, 8, sometimes it goes as long as 10 years. But in 2018, we last did a comprehensive review of our personnel manual, and that's a long process involving legal counsel, all kinds of things, the insurance carriers. But there are 4 things, or there are always things that will surface from time to time that need some tweaking. So we're bringing before you an amendment of 4 sections. They fall in Chapter 9, 11, 19, and 20 of the personnel manual, dealing with how we deal with internal family members in a department, record retentions on our performance evaluations, garnishments and what to do with repeated garnishments, and minor amendment on highway patrol investigations. So very small amendments. They're included in the document that's in your packet, and we're asking council for final action tonight.
Any questions for John? If not, final reading, please.
An ordinance authorizing the amendment to the City of Rolla Personnel Manual dated October 1, 2018.
I know it's cold and you're thinking. Is there a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion that the ordinance pass.
I'll second.
Motion made in second. Roll call vote, please.
Crowell,
Yes.
Schott,
Yes.
Reuter,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
Higgins,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes.
Lyons,
Yes.
Bolin,
Yes.
Mush,
Yes.
Florence,
Yay.
Eberly,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
all ayes.
Motion is approved. Moving on to the second item is an ordinance to amend the city code sections 2798, 110 relating to parking. Darren?
So as we discussed at the last meeting, staff received requests from the Rolla Police Department to change one of the parking spots along Pine Street from 30-minute parking to police-only parking. This is in front of the BIP's office. And so you've got a map showing where that would be, and then the attached ordinance, if approved, would make that change. Any questions?
If there's no questions, final reading, please.
An ordinance amending sections 27-98 and 27-110 of the general ordinances of the City of Rolla, Missouri, known as the Code of the City of Rolla, Missouri, and enacting new sections 27-98 and 27-10 in lieu thereof relating to parking.
Make a motion to approve.
Second. Motion made in second. Roll call vote, please.
Eberly,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes.
Bolin,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
Reuter,
Yes.
Mush,
Yes.
Higgins,
Yes.
Lyons,
Yes.
Crowell,
Yes.
Schott,
Yes.
Florence,
Yay.
12 ayes.
Thank you. Moving on to new business. Before I turn this over to John, for council's benefit, this is listed as one item on your agenda, but it's really 2. It's an important one. It's something that we have been working as a community for quite a number of years. However, what we would like to do tonight is to, after the initial presentation, we'd like to get some feedback from council as to whether or not you want to pursue what we call a two-step process dealing with the animal shelter. You may want to feel comfortable deciding that tonight. You may want to take a couple of weeks to wait for citizen input. We have time to do that. Depending on your answer on that part, then the second part would have some significance, and that would be the recommendation that we would make to pursue the next steps, which would include such things as awarding some contracts. So with that, John?
Thank you, Mayor. Let me bring back just a little bit of history on the animal shelter, and I think council knows this perhaps better than the community, but we get lots of questions from the community. So, you know, we've had an outdated dog pound really from the 1970s. It was not intended to be what today's animal control shelters are all about. But as we were talking about replacing that facility, there was the reality that there was just no funding available to do that. And then somewhat out of the blue, a gentleman, Mr. Bobak, who knew Bill Jenks as mayor at the time very well, passed away. And much to all of our surprise, he left $441,000. And it actually wasn't for a new animal shelter specifically. The only language on the will or on the check was for animal care. But we brought that to the council, and pretty rapidly we all decided, okay, this is really important for us as a community. This is perhaps a third or a fourth of the funds we need to build something new. So let's set that money aside and see about approaching the community and building a new animal shelter. And that was in 2013. In 2014, we retained the firm Shelter Planners of America, and I'll point out that Mike Barnard from Shelter Planners is with us tonight. But we retained them just as a feasibility consultant. They've done work on animal shelters. That's all they do all over the country. And wanted them to, one, assess our facility, but give us some very conceptual preliminary ideas of what a new facility might cost. That report came back and suggested, plus or minus, these aren't exact figures, a 6,000 square foot facility would cost in the range of $1.6 million. Now, this was in 2014. There'd be another 20% or so for what they call the soft cost, engineering, design, some of the FF&E survey, that kind of thing, and land, if there's a property to be purchased. At the time, we were looking at the property as Sharp Road and 18th Street, where the Bill Ransdell building currently sits. And even then, we knew that this building footprint conceptually was really going to be tight on that corner with no capability for expansion. So with that information, the council in 2015 appointed a citizens committee to work on raising an additional $800,000 to $1 million. The goal at that time was a $1.5 million campaign, knowing that Mr. Eck had basically given about 25% of that. Well, that group, headed up by Wayne Perry, over the next 3 years did lots of things and held lots of various events and 5K runs and special events at the Public House and appearances at Summerfest, et cetera, et cetera. I'm drawing a blank on some of the others, but lots of other efforts. And despite their good efforts, after 3 years, they had committed, either through donation or pledges, an additional $275,000. And really, at that point, we had lost that steam. So by about 2017, 2018, the fundraising strategy really struggled. And it struggled because, quite frankly, we were all amateurs. None of us were professional developers. None of us were full-time working on that. We didn't have the resources to bring in a firm that would assist us in doing that. And despite some consultation with other developers and fundraising folks, we just weren't able to close that gap. So the last couple of years, we've been struggling with what to do and bring this project to something in the way of a deliverable to the community. In 2020, we were approached by a local business person about an existing building, and we came to the council about that concept, and council said, yeah, let's explore. And so in 2020, it was early 2020, we did a solicitation and actually received 3 proposals from businesses, existing buildings, that, quite frankly, once we had our engineering staff assess the 3 of them, they came back with a recommendation or conclusion that while all 3 could be retrofitted and retrofitted substantially for an animal shelter, the cost of doing so wasn't going to be drastically less than if we really approached sort of a bare bones animal shelter facility. And we were sort of using the city of Fulton as our model in that regard. We toured a dozen facilities, from beautiful high-end animal shelters to very small metal building projects, and we found Fulton was a good compromise. So actually, we took 3 or 4 different trips up to Fulton over the last 5 or 6 years to look at what they did. So based on that recommendation, and I never brought that full report to council, but it's 80 pages of pictures of those 3 facilities. The recommendation was that that was not the best option. There was one building that worked well, but it was almost in the least desired location. The building that probably had the best potential or best location was way bigger than what we needed and was in near a residential neighborhood that was going to have some issues with it from just a zoning standpoint. So where we're at today, and we've done this based on the conference call that we held maybe 2 or 3 months ago, where we had done a solicitation for architectural engineering services and wanted to see what might be out there as far as some assistance in being able to put this project together. And talking with both Michael Barnard from Shelter Planners of America and Archer Engineering, which put in a proposal combined, as well as Integrity Engineering, who put in a proposal, qualification statements, we began exploring this option of a two-phased approach. Build the shell, and then as funds become available to fill out or complete the interior. And that's really where we're at now. We can talk a little bit more about how we actually can put those pieces in place to get this project going. But that notion of starting a two-phased approach as opposed to what would be a traditional full design of a project that you put out for competitive bid and you decide whether you've got the money available. And at this time, we pretty much knew we don't have those dollars available. And so hence the suggestion of doing this sort of two-phased approach. So let me pause there, Mayor, if you will, and sort of see if there's some Q&A we need to have.
So let me summarize that and tell you what you really need to think about. Mm-hmm. What you and the community need to feel very comfortable with is we likely have enough money to design and engineer. We have the land. We have enough money to prepare the land and put the infrastructure in and probably put up a metal building. And that's it. So that's what John is referring to as phase 1. Phase 2 would come when enough private funds are raised to actually complete the interior. Now that completion could come with services in kind, if somebody wanted to donate electrical capabilities or something like that. The general thought is to probably have that phase we would do as our own general contractor or act as a general contractor. But the gut check that we're all going to have to make is we don't know quite when that second phase will come. The general opinion is that one of the reasons that fundraising has sort of maxed out, there's only so much wealth in this community, there's only so many big businesses that write big checks. But the reality of it is asking somebody to donate a substantial amount of money on an idea and an ideal that may or may not happen is difficult. So at least having a building there that people are going to be able to drive by, the belief is that that will also reignite, if you will, the fundraising efforts to then push us over the goal line. So before we talk about how we're going to do all of that, that's what we need some guidance from you on, and that's what we need some guidance from the community on. This continue to wait and sort of do little or nothing, or take the plunge and start this with a two-phase approach. Mm-hmm. So with that, Carolyn?
I think it makes a lot of sense to get something started and then go for more funding. But my question is, to get this started, get the building up, it finished except for inside, is that really going to take all of this funding we have, or the majority of?
It's more of a question of we think we have enough. I doubt that there'll be extra.
Yeah, hard to imagine at this point. But until we bid it, until it's designed and bid for the spec building or the prefab building, we would know that.
So do we know what that's going to look like yet? Have we gotten that far? Okay.
No, we'd have to retain architectural services, and that's what we're talking about with Shelter Planners of America. But we want to conceptually get some buy-in, make sure that that's the comfort level of the community.
So are we still considering that 6,000 square foot $1.6 million facility, or are we gonna look at some different options? Is that the plan? Do we know yet? Have we gotten that far?
Well, we don't have the, so what we have is we have cost estimating that's been done on other animal shelters. And a good way of putting it in perspective, and numbers are crazy high, right, when you talk about this, but again, the mayor's reminded us that the airport terminal at the airport was 2,600 square foot. So less than half of what we're talking about here, and that was $780,000 in just construction costs.
Right.
So can we build something for less? We can, because we're not building it, we don't envision an all brick facility in an office environment, but we're building basically a facility that is a big bathroom, kitchen, and medical facility for animals. So when you think of building in our homes, the most expensive square footage is bathrooms and kitchens and things. So, this is not an inexpensive project, but it's not expensive from the shell perspective.
Right,
the shell can be done and delivered in a much more cost-effective fashion than the interior finishes. And the interior finishes, depending on how you invest in those, depend on the operating costs, which are, quite frankly, every bit as critical to us at this point as capital costs. We have to be very conscious of the operating, because this is another expense that comes out of the police department and public safety budget as well.
Yeah, these facilities are very regulated, and there's a lot of expensive coatings on floors and walls and ceilings and all of the health care that you would find in a human health care facility. And John's last point is important. So we don't have any money to take the project across the goal line. But the reality of it is, remember, I'm going to keep coming back to that general fund. There is X amount of dollars that we currently devote to animal control now on a day-to-day operating basis. So we really have to design, build, and operate something that's pretty darn close to what we're currently spending on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah, we can do some of this ourselves and blunder through it, but like any construction project, if you do it wrong, you have change orders. Change orders are time and money. If you do it wrong, your operating costs are not going to be efficient, they're going to be inefficient. So that's how all of these components work together.
And another way of thinking of that 1.6 million, that would be on a traditional full design, and you bid out, and a general contractor takes responsibility for delivering that package.
Right.
They've got prevailing wage, they've got bonding requirements, they're acting as the general contractor, and so they've got a 10% margin on top of everything else. The idea here is, let's get that shell built, and then on phase 2, the city will act as the general contractor.
Right.
And we'll be piecing out every aspect of that, and where we can do it through in-kind donated services, where we can use RTI, where we can use city crews. All of that brings down sort of that total cost of $1.6 million. We'd love to be able to say, we got this whole thing done for $1.1 million. And that's possible out of actual expense, but that's going to take us some time to manage that. And at this point, we simply don't know how long that's going to take to finish this out.
I like this idea. I think building costs are going up. I don't see them coming down, and I think the interest we're earning on this money is not growing as fast as building cost. I think it's a great idea to get this thing going and get something on the ground, and then let momentum take us over the finish line.
David?
I would just add, I'm pretty much in agreement with Carolyn and John on this. I think everybody who's talked about this before, and we've discussed the issue before, I think we realize that at the fundraising side, we're at a little bit of a stall. And I think seeing something materialize that people can get excited about, hey, there is something, it's actually here now, there's a building, and we're working. I like the idea that we could kind of be our own general contractor. I think that would save us. So I would just say I'm in agreement with the two-part strategy. I would still also love to hear from the public. This is our community shelter, so give us your feedback in the next couple of weeks. We'd definitely love to hear input. Two other quick things. In terms of the layout, when the engineering gets done, this is kind of a question for Mayor and John, I think. When the layout gets done and the first phase gets done, the layout is kind of established, because like where sewer needs to run out and where pipes need to come in, needs to be done, some of it under the concrete. So that would be kind of already laid out, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why you're investing the money in this first phase.
Gotcha. Because you're really going to have that all designed, and then you're just piecing it together from there. You're not making big changes or that. Okay. And the last thing, I did actually get an email, I think a few of us on council, or maybe all of us did, from a constituent about the location, and it was actually interesting because it was something I thought about as well. Looks like our location is what I think is in a great spot. It's out near the Rolla Rural Fire Station. It's land that I believe we own, so we're saving some money there, which is great. But obviously, it is very close to a lot of runoff and creeks and stuff, and I'm not sure what floodplain map this is, but I assume it's some sort of 50, 100-year flood thing. But we've been having 50, 100-year floods every 5 years, so my question is, are we worried about a 100-year flood coming that actually is worse than this, that floods it, and what is the impact on that if it does happen? Like, are we setting ourselves up for a potential problem there, or are we fairly secure for some reason that that's not a problem? Hey, if it floods, that'll just clean it all out, and that's great.
Yeah. No, it's a good question, because, you know, the map I included in your package shows exactly that 100-year floodplain. The reality is, we've been arguing with the Corps of Engineers that they have been way over generous on what the floodplain is on a lot of our corridor. They're just not defined very well. And we know this corner very well, and it is never flooded throughout. I mean, the creek certainly will run, but the property flood. But part of the whole design will be, does that, you know, figuring out those elevations, what's the elevation of the building? And if that needs to be built up a little bit to provide that additional, that's all part of that design element. But it's a good point, and it's something that the engineers will definitely have to factor in.
Okay, appreciate it.
The other thing on location that I learned in 2014 is that, you know, in the 70s, they were called dog pounds. Today, they're animal shelters. In the 70s, you found some remote part of town, and that's where you put the quote-unquote dog pound. If you want to foster adoptions, in particular, then these things are put in locations just like a retail establishment. You want people to drive by. You want to see the puppy in the window. You want to have the room that little Johnny can go in. All these things to help foster adoption of pets. So that's another thing that the existing city property would give us. Anyone online, Matthew?
Yeah, I just had a question about this, because I think it's a good idea and we need to move forward. But I have some concern in the sense that before we thought we could raise the money through fundraising, and we were wrong, or at least partially wrong, because we didn't have the professional fundraisers that we needed. And now we're saying, well, if we just have a building, we'll be able to raise the money. Are we just making assumptions about how we can raise money, or do we actually have something that says if we have a building, the money will come? Because I would hate to build a building and have it sit there for 10 years and slowly rot away and never be working for an animal shelter. So do we have some idea that this is really the impetus that we need?
You know, Matt, I wish I could say that we have them lined up, but we have heard from a lot of donors who at this point just are not confident that the project's going to happen anytime soon. And so that whole engagement has sort of drifted away over the last 2 or 3 years, as some people have put up some significant donations to this point, and we really can't give them any idea when we're going to be able to deliver on this. But the other big challenge that we had, and we heard this in talking with fundraising consultants, is that in order to be really effective at this, you really need to show people what it is you're going to deliver from the very beginning. And we just didn't have the resources to make that investment, to give an image of what this building might look like, even if it was just a schematic of the facade of it, because we didn't want to overpromise. We didn't want to show something and then find out, okay, we're not going to be able to deliver that product, and so we're having to deliver something very different than what they may have given. That's a cautious, prudent approach, but I think that worked against our fundraising as well. So we're just going off the anecdotal conversations we've had with donors, and while $1 worth of donors out there, or $300,000, we don't at this point. We're going to have to re-engage that process to figure out how we get this thing done. But it's not just going to be in cash donations. I think we'll work subcontractors, we'll work city crews, we'll work RTI. We'll find ways to get some of that done in lieu of cash donations, if that makes sense. But it may take a while to do it.
Ann?
So in the meantime, will we keep the existing shelter in place and operational?
Yes.
We will, but it's struggling all the time, more and more all the time. The guys do a great job maintaining it. Chief could tell us, we get an inspection every year from the Department of Ag, and they compliment our guys, and they are very critical of the facility. I don't know that there's a point in time where they say you're no longer able to operate the facility. We've not had that conversation with the Department of Ag, but we need to be making plans for a replacement facility. Jody's got a question.
Jody?
And Marie, too.
Would be the estimated timetable for the completion of phase 1? When the building would be up and we'd be working on getting the money to go forward with phase 2?
Let's if we can, we can talk through phase 1. And Mike, I don't know if you can hear us. Can you talk a little bit about the schedule on design, pre-design?
Why don't we do this? Why don't we hold Jody's question and then let Mike, some of us met him before, let Mike introduce himself. He knows about Rolla, and then make sure you answer Jody's question from that point. And then, before we do that, though, Marie, you had a question. Why don't you let us know what that is?
Yeah, Jody asked my question. That was my question as well.
Okay.
Just the time frame on phase 1.
Okay, Rachel?
Yeah, although I think Lister had his hand up. Did you need to ask a question, Lister?
Yes, I'm curious about, so let me understand this. We'll design a new one, but we'll keep the existing one running, and so the new one will be just a shell until we get the money to make it actually functional, right?
Correct.
Right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, all right. I guess I'm curious about when we get the new one built, are we foreseeing that we're going to have extra budget for the new facility? You know, for assuming electricity is going to be higher, but personnel as well then. So we're talking about a budgetary increase if that's the case. And I know we don't have those answers probably right now. It's just something I'm thinking about as we're considering this. So, and when we have the shell of the structure there, are there going to be, there's going to be expenses associated with just that shell too, aren't there?
Not for phase 1. I mean, phase 1 will be, site preparation, that kind of thing, but, that's pretty much just limited to the building. But you're right, I mean, it's going to be a challenge to do all the interior completion of it. But going back to your question about operating costs, part of what surfaced in the Shelter Planners of America study back in 2014, which assessed our current operation and the budget that we were using, that report points out that we are very low on a per animal cost currently in our existing facility, likely to increase with the new facility. Square footage is going to be designed differently. We really are going to want to run this differently. This will have a facility manager that's really doing community education and outreach and promotion and hosting birthday parties and things differently than what a traditional animal control officer does. So there are operating costs and increases that are part of all of this well that have to be addressed as we've talked about, not just on the capital side, but on the operating side as well.
Are you looking at this new facility to be something like people can have doggy parties or something like that? I'm just
No, it's amazing. We've toured facilities, and they're very, very popular for kids' birthday parties, and kids are generous, and they'll have their friends bring food. I mean, we've seen it over and over in these facilities. And, there'll be some kind of a group, we don't know the name of it yet, but friends of the animal shelter. We've always had volunteers and always had donations at the shelter, but it's never been anything I think anyone was very proud of. The whole idea of this new facility is it's going to be a facility the community can be proud of, and we think as a result of that, there'll be more ongoing operational support, food donations. We may do a little bit of merchandising sales if it makes sense in some niche area here. So I think that's all the creativity that comes with a facility or a shelter manager.
I've got a couple questions. With the asking about the birthday parties. I know that that's successful because at the elementary schools, whenever I was teaching, they'd talk about doing that all the time. Going to read to the dogs as like a group, and that would help the kids get their literacy up. And then kids having birthday parties at animal shelters. The one in Salem is usually what people would choose when I was talking to them. My main question is though, so when I was a student at S&T, we put on an event called Puppies at the Puck once every semester, and we did it focused on mental health awareness and how animals can help you decrease your stress and increase your oxytocin and dopamine levels. And we would do it around midterms or finals every semester, just depending on the weather. And this really increased the amount of people who would adopt, because what we would do is we would have all the animals come to campus. Like, we would go pick them up in trucks, and it was kind of a hassle to do it, but we all came together and got it done. And we would bring all the animals to campus at the Puck in the middle of it, and we would set up fencing, like from the fraternity and sorority parties that they do. We would get fencing like that, and we would keep the small cats in there, and we called it the cat pen. And so people could go in there, and you had 30 minutes, and you would pay between $5 and $10 depending. And when your time was up, you had to give the animals back, the dogs back, the puppies back. You could walk them around campus and all of that. Otherwise, you brought them back. We took their contact information and all of that, so it was safe. They signed a waiver saying, like, they wouldn't sue us if the animal scratched them or something. Like, all of the things were in place because S&T wouldn't approve it otherwise. But the problem was we always had to go to Tri-County Animal Shelter in St. James, because I was told repeatedly that the Rolla Animal Shelter would not allow us to partner with them on this, and that we would not be allowed to bring animals to campus, that we would not be allowed to do any of that. And I was told it was a liability issue when I was a student, but again, the university approved it because we took so many precautions and made people sign a waiver being like, hey, you're handling an animal, life could happen, you know? And I think that it would get people excited about the animal shelter. It would partner with S&T more, which I think is really important, and it would bring more money because people want to adopt animals, especially when you're in college and you're living alone for the first time, renting by yourself, and you might be struggling with your classes. And when we have Puppies at the Puck, I watched people who had no intention of getting an animal get an animal all the time at that. And it really changed them for the better. Like, we had people who would come back with their animals this next semester just to bring back their dogs and come have fun with us. So would we be open to changing whatever policy that is so that we could do something like that with S&D? I know that they still put on the event.
Yeah, I actually had not heard of that one, but we do several adoption events and take animals around. Now, our numbers have not been very high as of late, so it may have been just a volume issue or a manpower staffing issue, but I think the whole idea of a new facility is we're going to do a lot more in outreach. That's the idea of a shelter director who is really this liaison with the community and education and training opportunities. That's almost coming with all these new facilities that are out there, just a whole variety of new services that you're seeing in these facilities.
Cool. Awesome, cool. I was just wondering, just talking to other people who were still at campus, when they had saw that this was coming up to talk about, they were like, are we ever going to get to use that animal shelter? Are we still going to drive to St. James or Salem? So you'll definitely have people interested, for sure.
Yeah.
Rachel?
Okay, thank you, Lou. This is a question for John, because I noticed here in the fourth paragraph, city solicited architectural engineering services. So you put out an RFQ, and how many responses were there, or?
There are 2 responses for that.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to sort of clarify before.
Yep.
Okay, so Mike, why don't you introduce yourself, your company, talk a little bit about 2014 when you were here. There's a question from Councilperson Eberly, and give us your thoughts on what you've heard so far.
Yes. Thank you for having me. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, so we came there and did the needs assessment study and conceptual design several years ago. We've actually stayed in touch with John over the years, every now and then, just checking on how the fundraising was going. And at this point, what he's outlined to us and several other city staff that we've met with about the two-step seems like a good way forward. You have this money that's enough to build a shell building. It is something we've observed all around the country. Notion of people giving, they don't know that it's going to get done. So, trying to get the first group of people that don't, commit the money is a little bit of a challenge. So, we're optimistic that if you build this shell, it'll let the citizens know that you are in fact serious about getting this done. From what I know from the local architect, engineering firm, Archer Elgin, he said the city staff are very well equipped to serve as their own general contractor to do the piecing together of the interior once you got the shell building up. I wouldn't necessarily say that if it was a church building committee or some other groups, but these guys seem very skillful. So I think it's a good way, it's a good plan to go forward. As far as the question about the timing, what we had outlined in our proposal was a total of 5 months of design. It's the design of not only the shell building, but also all of the interior. So everything would already be off. I think somebody else asked about this. Where's the plumbing lines and all that would actually already be all figured out. But the phase one construction would just be the shell building. So it'd be the site work, the building foundation, the under slab plumbing and electrical, the building superstructure itself, walls, roof, and so it'd be completely in the dry and dried in. And then the city staff could come as money was available, or if there was an in-kind donation of electrical work or whatever, and manage that, to get it finished the rest of the way. So as far as phase one would be finished, about 5 months of design, 2 months of bidding and procurement, contracting, and then about 4 months, we think about 4 months to build just the shell building. So I think that added up to, is that 11 months? So, it's not lickety split, but it's not real long. And then, of course, how long will it take to do phase two? I think is yet to be determined. But if it was, just a matter of building the work, it's probably about 6 months worth of time to finish out the interior. But if you don't have the money to do it all at once, maybe you do part of it, for a few months, and you wait for a few more donations, and then you do a little bit more. So maybe it would be done over, a year or 2 years. It'd be subject to, of course, the funding. Helps.
I'm going to froze up a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, Mike, can you hear us?
Is there any other questions?
Any other questions for Mike?
Mike, go ahead, Carolyn, I'm sorry.
I have one. What type of building are we talking about? I'm assuming not metal.
No, probably metal.
Will it be metal?
Metal building with a veneer front.
With a veneer front.
Yeah. Mike, I don't know if you could hear that question. We haven't designed the building yet, but the question was a metal building, and my suggestion was probably a metal prefab building with a veneer front with some accents on the front of it. But anything you want to share on that?
Well, moving on, but I think John's right. It won't be a brick building.
And that's, for instance, what Fulton built. It's a metal building,
I
prefab
know
building.
they've come a long way.
Hey, Michael, question I was going to ask, if you can hear us okay. There's lots of prefab design metal buildings out there, Morton buildings, and just lots of them. You can find them in any magazine or newspaper. The idea, once the design is out, that just goes out for bid, and then those prefab packages will submit under those specifications that we identify in the final design documents. Can you comment on that?
Looks like he needs to unmute.
He's not even talking.
Mike, can you hear us?
His mic's
He can't even hear us.
Yeah, I don't think he's hearing it.
Can you hear me?
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, for some, the internet connection was lost, so I think you were asking about the construct to, essentially.
You're breaking up a little bit there. So the question is really, once we do the design on this and put this out for bid, any prefab company, Morton Buildings or any of dozens of them, would be able to respond to that procurement process.
Yeah, on the pre-engineered metal building.
Yes.
Usually there's a basis of design. We write our specification about a particular manufacturer, but there are several really good pre-engineered metal building companies that might be able to bid on the job. So there'd be a lot of competition for that.
Lister asked a question about the committee, and it's a good segue to what I was going to end this with. Back in 2014, I presented to the then council. We used a model early on at the center, and I think which would be appropriate here. We want citizen input for a lot of reasons, but when you look at a project like this, you can almost break it up into 3 phases. You've got the phase of fundraising. Fundraising is a skill set. So we set up that first committee and really chocked it full of people that knew something about fundraising. The idea that I presented in 2014 is once the fundraising was complete, that particular committee would essentially be disbanded, but there would be another committee for phase 2. And phase 2 is where we would be entering now. So you're talking about engineering, you're talking about bidding, you're talking about constructing, you're talking about designing for efficient use. So I would envision a citizens committee to help both the outside consultant, the engineering firm, and city staff to provide input from that. So we would envision some people that know something about construction. We would envision putting somebody on that committee that knows something about animal care, for instance. When the facility is gone to bid, then that particular committee can be dismantled. And then we enter the final stage when we're done, and that is a committee that would actually be put together the longest period of time, and that would be a citizen committee that would act as somebody on an ongoing basis to help run the plant, I'm speaking on my work, to help run it. So 3 different committees, 3 different purposes, and filled with people with 3 different set of skill sets. So circling back to Lister's question about the citizen committee that was asked to raise this money, when city staff came up with this concept, the very first group that John went to as a sounding board was in fact that committee, because that's really the input that we sought first and foremost. So with that, John, why don't you explain their reaction?
Yeah, so, and these are people that we've heard from before. Again, Wayne Perry was sort of our chairman for years on that. Don Smith, Suyu Daly, I'm going to start forgetting some of the names, Judy Cavender, anyway, a group of about 8 or 10 folks, or PCAL was involved with that, Phelps County Humane Society early on was involved with that. So when we first talked about this, getting this phase 1 going, I reached out to them, and their response across the board was much like your reaction tonight, is they realized how difficult it was to really be able to sell a concept without having a vision. And so they were very enthusiastic about the idea of getting this money out of the account. As John has said, it's earning almost no interest at all and only losing buying power, and getting that into a building project that at least gives the community something that they can rally around to complete. So the fundraising committee, I don't want to commit them to saying that they're willing to pick this back up and run with it. We may have to add some new people to that if that's the case. But they've been passionate and committed all along. So I think if they see an effort by the community, by the council, I'm certain we'll see more of their energies on this project as well.
Any other questions? So I think we're looking for that gut check. If you are feeling comfortable with the two-phase approach, then our idea would be to probably bring back the next meeting and ask your permission to award. But this will give all of us 2 weeks to see what kind of public input we get. Good to go? Thank you.
Sounds good.
Oh, Lee Burr was on it also, John.
Lee Burr was on there too. Yep.
Next section, claims and/or fiscal transactions. We have none. Mayor, City Council comments. I've got a couple of short ones. For those of you that are on Fidelity, this is not an attempt to pick on Fidelity, but if you haven't looked at your most recent bill, we did get a letter in City Hall, and there's going to be some price increases. Frankly, I think they're substantial. $4 or $5 a month on internet, and I think 11 or 12 bucks a month on cable. So just so the public knows that, but more importantly, don't blame the city. I guess is my reason for mentioning it. Cold weather, I think Rodney said it best. We have employees today that are doing a hell of a job out there, and I know tomorrow when I see that recycling truck go by, my heart's going to be out to those people in that kind of weather. So let's keep them in mind. Other than that, council comments. Rachel?
Oh, I just wanted to mention, it did pop, he did leave a message in the chat, but Dr. Schramm, who's the faculty representative for the St. Pat's Board, he contacted me and was like, I had to step off. I don't have definite information tonight, but I will be ready to present at the first meeting in March. So I guess that we have that to look forward to.
And Rachel, I think their plan was to appear on the March 1st meeting, and I think we may have gotten some wires crossed for the appearance tonight, but we would have put a little bit information in the packet for that. So we'll plan that for the March 1st meeting.
Awesome.
There's no other council comments.
I've got one too, sorry. You might have seen, I sent an email to all of you about halfway through this. Somebody messaged me asking if I would bring this up. There is a national and statewide organization going on to create a resolution to memorialize what has happened in the last year with COVID. I sent you all the email, but the resolution's already written up. All we would need to do is change St. Louis to Rolla. But essentially, all it does is recognize that it's a global pandemic, and it accounts for the people who have lost their lives and creates a Memorial Day annually on the first Monday of March, because March is when we first knew about it or at least when we were told about it as a country. And I said I would bring it up. They did not, they weren't able to get it to me any sooner. They reached out about 5 minutes into the meeting. And I don't know, I said that we definitely wouldn't have enough time to pass this before that first Monday in March, but I wanted to bring it to all of you anyway. If you're not looking at it yet, or if you have any questions about it, if you have looked at it, go ahead. I don't know a whole lot about it though, so I would have to get back into contact with the organizers who reached out to me, but I am more than happy to do that.
Well, give us a chance to see it and read it and digest it. Mister?
Yeah, want to encourage everybody to recycle. People on city council and in our community. Well, I didn't understand this as well, but my understanding is recycling, we get to sell that, so we earn a profit on recycling, and all waste we have to pay for the disposal of the waste. So every time we recycle, we're basically saving money, and every time we're throwing our recyclable things in the trash, we're just throwing money out in the trash. But for our city, please recycle as much as you can.
Mr. I would just add to that, we are big believers in recycling and absolutely agree with that. It's not profitable in the traditional sense. The value in recycling markets dropped a bunch, but there is cost avoidance. And Brady does a nice job. Usually every year at budget, we'll talk a little bit about that. But recycling can cost, but there are lots of good reasons still to be actively recycling. If we can't do curbside, we certainly want to encourage people to use the drop-off facility, which is very much a county-wide and beyond drop-off facility on McCutcheon.
It's a nationwide fallacy to believe that recycling pays, and in most cases, it has a higher cost than throwing it in the landfill. And around the country, more people have exited recycling, particularly of some commodities, in recent years than have entered it. That said, we still have a moral obligation to recycle. So by all means, we want to keep recycling, but it's a little bit tenuous to draw the connection that says it's really economically viable to do it. It's just the right thing to do. We should recycle.
So if we, my counter. So we sell the recyclable stuff. We do get paid a small amount of money on that, and so that's less than we have to dispose of. So that's
well, the problem is on the cost center, Lister. So if you look at recyclables, number one, all of them have come down in value, and some of them have gotten to virtually no value because of changes in China. So the paper that used to go to China and some of these other commodities are not going, and the market's collapsed. So on the revenue side, there's less. On the cost side, there is increased requirements now to enhance quality. So one of the reasons that a lot of people have gotten out of commingled collection, so if you're going to be successful in a community, you have to make it incredibly easy for the homeowner. You've got to make it convenient, or they're not going to do it. So the way that's normally done is throw everything in a bin. The problem with throwing everything in a bin is you get everything in a bin, and you got a quality problem, so now your costs get increased in order for you to make a better quality recyclable. The third leg to that stool is if you look at the actual collection. So when you look at those people that drive around town, we have to buy trucks, we have to employ people, we have to buy gasoline, we have to do all of that stuff that's essentially following the trash truck. So it's that whole holistic view that you have to look at to make that economic analysis.
I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate the conversation. I would like to hear from, maybe at the next meeting from Brady, because I strongly believe that it can be financially beneficial for the city, so I would like to maybe in the future just hear from him, and so he can present to me and give me, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I would just love to hear from him.
We could do that. I will tell you that Brady's presentations and the city budget is not really done properly to come up with that true answer. We have a tendency in the city accounting system to look at operating cost. So if you really want that answer, we need to take a little bit of a time and get to what the real numbers said it would be. Because the other thing you have to do, Lister, is let's not forget that building. It's one thing to put it in the blue bin and collect it, but we're also maintaining and staffing and equipping a building out there to do those recyclables. So we can do that, but that's not something that's likely to come back in one meeting or so.
No problem. Thanks, Mayor.
So, any other questions? Citizen communications.
Can you hear me?
Barely, but that's okay.
Okay. I just had a question about the University Drive relocation. I guess, how much does that affect the people that live behind where Hardee's and Taco Bell and Dairy Queen are?
Are you asking me the properties west of 63, how those are impacted?
Yeah, I
Okay.
believe so.
So the properties are all already purchased, either the city or the university, with the exception of one. And I think the best thing, Darren, do we have a picture here? We don't. But I think the best thing to do is to look at the map that shows where that road is going to be.
Okay, so I guess,
So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but if you're asking me what happens to the houses, they're going to be knocked down.
I know that much. I guess my question would really be was eminent domain used to possess those properties or anything?
No.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that's all I needed.
Any other citizen questions? Let me just, full disclosure, let me just clarify what I just told you. Eminent domain has not been used on any of the properties that have been purchased by us or the university.
In residential in particular.
In residential in particular. Comments for the good of the order? If not, we have nothing in closed session tonight, so meeting adjourned.